The Highguard situation is interesting because this is not something I was talking about. This wasn't something I followed. Apparently, this was one of the many games shown off at the Game Awards, but like everything else that paid $1 million to be on stage, it was a complete and total flop. I don't know why people are talking about Geoff Keighley in association with this project. Like, I guess this is something he spotlighted towards the game during the Game Awards, but this kind of goes into my point when it comes to like the Game Awards as a concept and why they don't work. The entire narrative has always been that like, oh, the Game Awards is the new E3 and you can show your game on stage to millions of people and you can promote your game and you can get all this audience and we've seen this consistently since this started happening that this does not work. Companies put their games out there and you never hear about them again. Okay, like that's the reality of pretty much everything that's ever been shown off at the Game Awards is that these are developers with like very limited resources that can't do their own presentations, who don't have their own built-in fan base, and so like are basically selling their projects to game journos essentially, and that's kind of why all of these games are so awful and lazy. There's nothing about these games that really appeal to anybody. I remember when I saw Bugsnax, on stage and thought it was the stupidest thing in the world. Now, you would be hard-pressed to find anybody who even remembers what Bugsnax is. Okay? Like, that's the general reality of the Game Awards, is that everything they promote, everything they hype up, everything they worship, everything that's supposed to be the next big thing, it completely and totally implodes and becomes completely irrelevant. That's the reality of it, is that the Game Awards is not making any real stars out of the games that pay for the advertising, okay? Like, at this point, and like, I really do feel this is true, the only thing that people care about the Game Awards at all is this idea that they are the official Game of the Year distributor. Like, they're the most organized, well-to-do, like, publicized, like, this is Game of the Year. We're gonna crown the best Game of the Year. It's like, crowning a girl for prom queen, right? It doesn't fucking mean anything. Nobody cares. Nobody will remember. It's not a thing that anybody cares about. Like, really. And yet, for some reason, the gaming industry has to rally behind this idea that the Game Awards means something, that it's like some huge honor, that all these gamers came together to agree that Clair Obscur Expedition 33 is like the greatest game of 2005. 2025. The reality, considering how few people watch these shows, how few people play these games, considering how games like this come and go like the wind, this is the reality at this stage, is that everything that isn't glazed by the Game Awards gets completely forgotten. Clair Obscur might have a small following for the next 5 years. It'll be forgotten very soon after that. But games like Highguard, games like Bugsnax, these games have no real momentum. They can't succeed. They can't find an audience. Not just because the people who watch these shows don't play games, but simply by the simple fact that they aren't good games at their core. The reason why nobody's going to remember Expedition 33 in the next several years is that it doesn't do anything to distinguish itself from the far superior JRPGs. It is shocking, how many RPGs I've played recently that I can 100% tell you are better than Expedition 33. There's just so many examples. Trails in the Sky is the most recent example I can come up with. And honestly, I would argue that something like Final Fantasy VII-R is better too. A game that I can't stand. There were just so many better RPGs that came out in 2025 that the Game Awards attempts at glazing Expedition was completely laughable and really needed to be called out for what it is. It is just a blatant attempt at manipulating people into thinking that this game was some big deal and some major cultural phenomenon, and it wasn't. And I think that's what we need to take away from the Highguard situation. What we need to take away from constantly seeing Neil Druckmann and Sean Murray on stage and constantly being told that No Man's Sky is good now. Every time this happens, we need to just remember just how nothing the Game Awards does matters. How they tried to sell us on this slop. How they tried to sell us on Highguard. How they tried to sell us on Bug Snacks. How they tried to, do everything to downplay Nintendo over the past several years, right? This is the consistent reality when it comes to the Game Awards, is that every time they throw their full weight behind a project, every time they heavily try to promote something like Highguard, it just completely collapses. It becomes absolutely irrelevant. And you can already see this happening with Clair Obscur Expedition 33 now. The difference is that, people aren't, shining a spotlight on it like they are with Highguard. Highguard, I think, is a particularly extreme example of this phenomenon, in which it got, really, really hyped during the award ceremony, and, it was supposed to be the next big thing. Hype is the next big thing. We're at the point now where, Geoff Keighley is getting laughed at for trying to sell people on, absolute bullshit. He's a snake oil salesman, right? He's trying to sell you on all of these slop games and trying to get people invested in, these Western video game designers when, nobody cares about them at all. Nobody wants to hear it. Nobody wants to talk about it. Nobody wants to, nobody wants to even think about these games. That's how bad it is. For the vast majority of trailers in the Game Awards, people see them and then, immediately forget about them. The Game Awards, a method of promoting itself, promoting its software, promoting, upcoming titles, it's been demonstrated that it does not work. The Game Awards, if it really wanted to take itself seriously, it needed to focus exclusively not on the awards, not on promoting upcoming games, not on anything else, not on celebrity endorsements, not anything. They needed to focus on real serious awards with actual industry people giving them out. But the simple reality is, the Oscars, it is more interested in forcing Marxist propaganda onto people than actually celebrating gaming. So that's going to be the problem that the show has going forward, is that you're going to see a lot more situations like this, and we have been seeing a lot of situations like this. The only reason anybody props up the Game Awards at this point in time is out of a desperate attempt to downplay Nintendo and to try and delusionally keep up the illusion that Western developers are putting out way more innovative and creative games than the Japanese. That's all they want to do. That's their main that's their main goal. That's why they tried shilling Expedition so hard. It was to undermine the JRPG, right? Something they haven't been able to do in 20 years, by the way. Even during the height of Skyrim and Mass Effect's relevancy. This is the reality of the situation we're in now, where everybody is just bending over backwards to try and keep the fraud going for as long as possible, and it's just not going to work. What we've seen is the beginning of the end of the Game Awards.